Making 3D easy and pervasive. Well, what do I mean by pervasive? Pervasive means as easy to move something from one place to another as seamlessly as it is for images and video and text in today's modern computing world. Very much 3D has kind of been in very sort of specialist areas, CAD, computer imagery, video games. It hasn't really sort of burst through into the mainstream. But I believe it is going to happen, and it will happen. And to kind of take you on the journey, I want to sort of show you where we've come from, how we've got to now, to kind of give you an idea of where we might be going. So I'm going to take you back to 1996, 20 years ago. So this is the big music of the year. Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill, Beck, of course, Spice Girls. That was my particular favorite. We've got Star Trek First Contact was one of the big movies of the year. Jerry Maguire was the largest movie of the year. Video games was really interesting. Lots of 2D video games was hugely popular with SNES and Sega Genesis and other things, but 3D video games were starting to burst through. Quake was one of the first big 3D first-person shooters. Mario 64 on the N64 was a 3D video game that you could jump around, and everyone thought it was impossible to do a 3D platformer. Wipeout was one of my particular favorites on PlayStation. So let's take a little look at what the world of computing was like in 1996. So, yes, there were some consoles coming out, and they were very exciting, but really, computers were these sort of like big, white, beige machines that were super noisy, and they had these massive screens that sort of used to flicker and would like give you a headache. I'm pretty sure the reason why I wear glasses now is because of these horrible things. And, everyone was talking about the downfall of Apple. That was like the big news, and how Bill Gates and Microsoft were going to take over the internet. It was actually 1998 where the iMac came out, and sort of Apple's fortunes began to shift. But interestingly enough, everyone was talking about virtual reality, and it never materialized. I mean, it was just far too expensive. It just made you incredibly sick. The graphics just weren't. It was just too far away from what you need. But in 1996, I think the most important thing to remember is, well, the internet sucked. It was so slow. To give you a bit of context, if you wanted to watch a movie, imagine if Netflix existed or something, you wanted to watch a movie, it would take you about 30 to 40 hours to download 1 hour of reasonable video quality. So it's just not possible. The things that we take for granted in the world around us today just don't happen. And don't even get me started on websites. This is what they used to look like. There was no design. It was very much an amateur world, very much populated by, geeks like myself. We'd publish stuff and do things and put, GIFs everywhere, but it was very, very different to the world that we live in today. So, if I now say to you, imagine a company that was bought for $1 billion in 2012, like Instagram, and we're in 1996, you'd be like, WTF, or what? Actually, that wouldn't have been invented then. You'd be, what? How does this work? What, I take some photos and I send them to you, or I see them in the chat channel and whatever. You just wouldn't begin to imagine how a company could explode like that, be as popular as that, and be as valuable as that. Well, how has that happened? Well, the value of Instagram is about the scale of the audience and the memories that people can share together. And really, all of the technology that needs to exist to enable that to happen, well, I think this particular setting is quite fitting, but the shoulders of the giants are incredibly high. So let's take a look at a few of them. Well, firstly, digital cameras. The digital camera revolution needs to have, eaten the traditional film photo cameras. I'm sure most of you remember, but some of you in the room who don't, You used to have to buy a thing called a film, and you'd put it in a camera, and you'd take some pictures with it, and then you had no idea what you'd taken. You'd put it in an envelope, you'd send it away, and then maybe 2 weeks later, you'd realize they were all terrible. And you'd be like, oh, great. And I have no memories of that particular time. And of course, now with digital cameras, I got my first one in about the year 2000, you can take as many pictures as you like. And I don't like it. Again. And everyone's like, no, please stop. One was enough. Fast internet. And I'm not talking about the dizzying heights we were promised of broadband where it was 2 megabits a second. Imagine when it comes to the village. No, I'm talking about 10, 15, 20, 50 megabits a second, super high-speed fiber optic broadband that needs to be laid across the ocean, kind of very much, reminiscent of the telegraph wires that were done, over 100 years ago. I'm talking about like Wi-Fi has to exist. It has to be sort of everywhere, and you can walk into any coffee shop and you can work like you are in the office. I'm talking about 4G. All of these things need to take place. This one, I think, is really, really important, pay-as-you-go servers, or is it commonly called the cloud. But it's essentially pay-as-you-go rent servers from a big company. Back in the day, if you wanted to create an internet company, you'd have to shell out a whole ton of money to go and buy all the machines, to go and put them somewhere, and then to make sure that somebody then serviced them if they, eventually exploded. Nowadays, you don't have to pay for anything. You sign up for free, you can start your internet company, you can start your web service, and you only need to pay as it grows. So this is very, very important for innovation. And lastly, these things, the supercomputer in your pocket. My grandparents could only dream to imagine what this thing can do when you compare it to sort of computers of the 50s and 60s, which took up an entire room. And these things are so powerful that they are just eating other businesses in their wake. I mean, they've already eaten digital cameras. They are eating taxi companies. I mean, Uber's been talked about a lot. They are eating sat-navs, These things are hugely important. And, even though we use them for mostly sending emojicons and all sorts of other things, but there you go. And so really this leads us to the point that mobile has eaten the world. And this is from Benedict Evans, with a great blog. And this is from 2013. It's like, mobile's eating the world. It's going to take over everything. Everything's going to be mobile. There's nothing else beyond that. Wow, that's all there is. But is this thing sustainable? Is it going to keep growing forever? I don't think so. I think we are beginning to see a plateau. So what could be next? Well, I believe it's 3D. And why do I believe it's 3D? Well, 2D is the abstraction. We have not had the technology to work in 3D easily. We have used 2D abstractions, 2D systems, 2D representations to explain and convey and communicate information, from cave paintings to diagrams, to the written word, to the printing press. This is how we've sort of shared information at scale, the various different scales over the years. And of course, naturally, computers have mirrored that. We've taken those same biases and those same tropes, and we've put them into digital form. And, Windows 10, iOS, Paint, these are all things that we are familiar with, from a sort of 2D sense. But 3D is on the rise, and you may not necessarily have seen something personally, but there's lots of 3D sensors and lots of 3D devices starting to appear. We humans are 3D creatures. We think in 3D. We interact with other people in 3D, and the world around us works in 3D. So we're beginning to see LiDAR, for example, from self-driving cars. That's light radar, so that it can essentially sense, the space around it. Sensors from Kinect to other things where you can sort of scan objects. From HoloLens, where you can scan a room and then put holograms in it, to virtual reality, where you can either be completely lost or you can, see your hands and it scans whereabouts you are. These things are all on the rise and are going to start becoming ubiquitous. But 3D is hard. And this is really where we need as much help as we can get, and particularly help from the next generations who are going through school and coming up through university. It's a hard problem to solve. From making sure that everything looks the same from one place to another. I mean, it used to be bad enough trying to get something to sort of print out the same as it looked on your screen, and you would be like, why is this different? But just making sure things are consistent, making sure that we understand 3D from one application to another, to make sure that when we scan things around the room, that we understand what that thing is. Oh, that's a chair, that's a person, that's a crying baby. So, what's the payoff? Why 3D? Why is it important? Well, I think, we are 3D creatures, as I've said before, and the world around us works in 3D. But if we can talk and explain and show and interact with things that we want to learn about, surely it will make us more productive. Surely it will make us learn faster. So, as an example, a parent and a child, a child asks the parent, oh, how does the car work? Really, sort of like, it's an innocent question, and it comes with a hugely complicated answer. There's, if we didn't have 3D computing, I would have to go, if I was the parent, oh, okay, well, there's this thing, and then there's this thing, and then this thing goes to here, and then this thing goes here, and it really comes down to the power of my rhetoric and my ability to explain. Or maybe I would jump over to a whiteboard if we had a whiteboard, and I'd go, oh, well, there's this thing here, and then it suddenly becomes about how well I can draw a picture of a car or anything else. But if we could both put on a headset, or we could both use a computer in some way that could represent 3D, I could just search for a car. And I'd go, well, look, here's a car, let's take away the chassis, let's press start on the simulation, we can see the car running. Oh, now you can see the fuel flow through to the engine. You can see the pistons turn around. Well, why don't we change some levers and dials and change how things might operate? Maybe we can break it. Maybe we can repair it, It would just very much aid understanding, and it would be very sort of, all about that sort of presence. Let's take a more sort of domestic setting. I don't know about you, but talking about my own personal experience, trying to decide on new carpet or new tiles for a particular room, I find extremely painful and unpleasant experience. You sort of shop for these things, you look online, you go, okay, well, let's try those tiles. You have to wait 2 or 3 days for them to come through the post. You put them on the floor, and you go, I've got no idea how this is going to look when it's the whole room. So you're kind of having to make a sort of guess, judgment, and other things like that. Well, if I can just put on a headset, and my wife can put on a headset, and we can easily scroll through a whole bunch of different samples as if we're scrolling through different options on a web page, and it knows where the room is, and it just essentially retextures it to the tiles and the patterns that we want. It senses the lights and the natural lights, so it casts shadows on it and everything, so it looks natural. Then I can basically choose the tiles that I want as easy as clicking through, a e-commerce website. But actually, it goes a bit further than that. These devices are constantly scanning the room around us. It's constantly scanning my house. So actually, it's building up an index of everything that it finds. And it has to do that in order to track where everything's going. So there's no reason I can't ask the computer, where are my keys? And it should be able to say, oh, your keys are through there. And it points me to it with waypoints as if it's like a video game. And maybe it tricks me and say, no, it's actually not there at all. But actually, you can take that then one step further. What happens if just, these devices that people are wearing, are scanning public spaces? What if they're scanning a museum? What if we can, through the power of, connected servers and big data, we can correlate all that information, and I can go to that place and I can see the things that are being scanned. I can actually go and walk around it. And I can then ask the computer questions about where particular items are. There's no reason why that can't happen. Now, if you think about that on an even bigger scale, if that's constantly happening day after day, there's no reason why when I go and visit that place in a virtual reality headset, I can't then just scrub back through time and see how it's changed over the years. Wouldn't that really change the way that we appreciate time and our spaces and the information that's in them? And then lastly, I want to talk about sort of collaborative 3D design. This happens quite a lot. Somebody wants to rearrange a space. It could be an architect building a new space for you at work, or it could be like somebody wants to rearrange the office. Oh, okay, we want to put some tables over here. We want to put some chairs there. We want to put some artwork on the wall. In a sort of ultimate accessibility way, nobody's going to have like these super skilled 3D modelers who are going to come up and do a sort of rough draft for you, and it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks. What normally happens is, if you've already got the space, you walk around and you talk about it, and you go, oh, okay, well, imagine this thing's here, and imagine this thing's over there, and everyone has to go, okay, I'm imagining this thing, and I'm imagining the thing over there. Or they have a diagram of the floor plan, and they go, okay, we're putting this thing here, we're putting this thing here, we're putting this thing here, and you go, okay, and then you have to have another meeting to then agree, and then another meeting. Well, in a world of 3D computing, all of that stuff goes away. One person creates the space and put things where they are. That exists all digitally, and then they go, hey, I'm starting a meeting. Come and join in, and everyone else puts on their headset, and then we're all in the space together. And then the person who's designed it can walk you around the space and say, oh, I'm thinking of doing this thing here. I'm thinking of putting this thing here. I'm thinking of putting all these pictures of me over here. And everyone else can just real-time edit and go, actually, you know what? I want the coffee machine here. I want this to be green. I really want more pink on this over here. And all of a sudden, in one meeting, everybody has got completely aligned. Everybody is sharing the same experience. And crucially, because it's about presence, because other people are there, they might have an avatar, and it could be cartoony, it could be very realistic. It's actually a very natural interaction for people, and I don't know if anybody here has ever been in a sort of real-time VR space with others. It's actually super natural, and everyone has tremendous amounts of fun, because it's not like a traditional conference call. When you're on a conference call, it kind of sort of it does strange things to your mind. You're like, people can't see each other. They sort of talk over each other. There's like awkward phases. Actually, when you're in a VR space together, it's just like being in a normal space, and people start acting crazy and having fun. So, my last point really, and this is really about, we know that 3D computing is becoming a thing. There is more and more devices, it's becoming more and more popular, they are becoming cheaper and cheaper. We know that the workplace will change. And culturally, there's not only been a generation growing up with 3D video games, there is now a very young generation playing games like Minecraft, where they think in 3D, they design in 3D, they create and they communicate in 3D. Now, do that in a 2D screen, so it's inevitable that that's going to change and become in full 3D. So my question really is to any of the youngsters in the room is, what's going to be the billion-dollar business that you guys are going to build on top of the 3D foundations that we're building today? Thank you.